Hi there, I'm Mark Chalom with the New Mexico Solar Energy Association, and today I'm fortunate to be with John Perlin, author of the book Let It Shine, the 6,000-Year History of Solar Energy. It's a wonderful read. I have read it a number of times. It is the second edition. The first book was on golden thread, and that was a fantastic book that I have in my library, and it's a real go-to book. John, thank you for being here and sharing with myself and the New Mexico Solar Energy Association. Welcome. I have a number of questions for you, and we're going to go right to it.
Let's go.
As a physicist from Santa Barbara, what got you into writing about solar energy?
Well, actually, that's a long story, but the short end is I was in Jerusalem. I had just quit kibbutz looking for what I wanted to do in life, and I was on a bus and it was raining and the red soil of Jerusalem was pouring down the streets, and I decided I wanted to be a writer. And once I decided to be a writer, I then was looking for a subject, and I came back to Santa Barbara. Exxon was saying the only way we can produce energy is from fossil fuels, so I went to the library, and this was a long time ago, 74, and looked all the publications on solar energy and saw that there might be another way.
Well, I think you did a great job, and you've really summed up 6,000 years of technology, and it's very helpful to all of us to have something like that to go to. It's called a Bible, encyclopedia, and it really is jam full of information.
Well, I'd like to say one thing is the difference
Sure.
between this book and a golden thread is a golden thread was only like half the text of this new book, and this new book covers like all continents, and also unlike a golden thread, Let It Shine tells the story of photovoltaics also.
Right, which is the whole new direction solar has been going in, and it is really fascinating. We were talking about it, and you mentioned that the 1800s was the first time that someone was able to generate electricity from solar. And that's a pretty fascinating fact.
Well, actually, they generated electricity before, but this was the first time they discovered that light itself, not heat, could produce electricity. And that changed the whole story of physics, because physics beforehand was all focused on heat. Heat drove engines. Light consisted of light and heat rays. And suddenly they discovered that light rays themselves produced energy. That led to Einstein discovering that light contains energetic particles, and that transformed all of science into what we call quantum mechanics, a whole new range of science never discovered before, and the principal science of physics right now.
Well, that's pretty exciting, and I guess it's all various wavelengths of light.
Various wavelengths.
Different spectrums.
Well, actually, that's what Einstein discovered, was that each wavelength of light has a different amount of energy.
And different characteristics.
Exactly. And that was totally contradictory to the pillar of science at the time, that light consisted solely of wave. And it's sort of like a surfer on a wave. The surfer is the photon with the energy, and the wave is what's pushing him along. And that introduced a whole new area of science, and one of the parts of that science is photovoltaics.
Okay, John, out of 6,000 years of solar development, what periods of time in history excited you the most, and why?
Well, that's like saying, what child is my favorite? And I like them all. I mean, they're all amazing discoveries. I mean, the discovery that you could design houses that if you did the right type of orientation and the right type of materials, you could heat your house during the wintertime and avoid the heat during the summertime. I mean, I think that's just an amazing concept. It's so simple, yet so profound. And I think that's what science is all about, finding the simplest and most profound ways of doing things. And then, say, the discovery of that glass trap solar heat was another just great discovery, because then we could really keep a place warm, because we discovered that although glass let in sunshine, it kept in the heat.
One spectrum.
As one spectrum, and then the wavelength changed as it hit as heat. So that's another great discovery of evolution. Then the third evolution was that you could concentrate with certain curved metals, solar energy, to create fire. And then the next great discovery was that if you put certain fluids inside a glass-covered box, you could heat water, or you could heat air to higher temperatures, which could be used, for example, for bathing. And then the fifth great breakthrough or evolutionary example is, and this I think is just the most magical piece of discovery that humanity has ever done, and that's why I'm so excited about photovoltaics, is what is more amazing than taking light with a 160 micron or less material and directly changing it into electricity. I mean, it's just the greatest transformation, the greatest alchemy ever discovered.
It is. And that leads us to the idea that we have the technology, and a lot of that technology is not being applied because of commercial, economic reasons or political reasons.
Well, also,
like power companies, the fossil fuel industries, seems to be holding back the solar industry and the solar technology.
well, yeah, it's like, for example, canal builders seeing the first 30 miles of railroad track being laid by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, I think in the 1840s. A total freak out, right? Here the canal builders were constrained by waterways, and suddenly you could like lay out track any place and go anywhere.
Yes.
And the same thing applies to photovoltaics, which I think most people don't yet realize the true potential, because you can put the panels anywhere and have your own powerhouse. Beforehand, you had to build a very large, say, centralized power plant and then send it to individual houses. But instead, now each house can become its own powerhouse.
Yes, and even in urban areas now, as an architect, I'm very excited about a lot of these new materials. Windows, building screens, roofing materials, even materials that could be painted on, that are now generating electricity.
Yeah, well, also you find intellectual lag too, because for example, when Einstein discovered that light was a particle, this really irritated the scientific community, because it destroyed the entire notion that was the prop or the foundation of all of physics. And so at first, when Einstein described how light acted, he was called bold, he was called, these are in scientific journals, reckless, and he was being unreasonable by destroying the old science. But then the same person who stated all those arguments against Einstein found out that step by step, Einstein's equation better explained how light interacted in certain situations, and suddenly became the person who proved Einstein was correct. And suddenly we had this, and this irritated scientists too, was the duality of light. That light is both a wave and a particle. And that's what we live with now. And because photovoltaics relies on Einstein's idea of the particle interacting with the electron, we can call Einstein the father of photovoltaics.
Photovoltaic, very interesting. Let's get a little more local.
Sure, let's get local.
All right. We're in New Mexico. I'm with the New Mexico Solar Energy Association. How does New Mexico fit into the 6,000 years of history? And what's unique about New Mexico?
Well, what's unique about New Mexico is, first of all, we have a lot of cave dwellings where people got into the same problems that we got into, we're into today, is finite resources. And they had to somehow make do. And so they started to realize that the sun is high in summer and low in winter. It's in the south all the time in winter, and east and west most of the time in summer. And so they found caves that had the proper situation where we could avoid the east and the west.
Right.
And we could take in the south. And so that's what makes New Mexico unique. And also the fact that New Mexico probably has one of the best solar resources in the world. I think what's accurate is to call New Mexico, Arizona, California, the Persian Gulf of solar energy. And
we agree with that.
And actually, not to have, why not say it, call it solar wells rather than being dependent on coal and oil and things like that. We have this pipeline from the sun to people in New Mexico that is not being constructed. It's sort of like the Keystone pipeline that they want to construct. Why not just, and what I look at solar cells, I look at solar architecture as the pipeline that uses the sun.
Yes, and it's working so well that we don't even have to put the PV in the Southwest to run the power to the East Coast. We can just put the panels in the East Coast and forget about the whole transmission line.
Exactly. That's
and
what
localization is really going to take off, which leads to the next question.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, what's really interesting about that is Einstein's idea of light as a particle makes everything local. Do you follow? That each photon that hits a solar cell and moves the electron has its own locality. In other words, it's not this flow of light, it's each individual particle. And so by quantizing, and that's the whole story of photovoltaics, is the idea of quantizing light in a local. So what we can do too is we can quantize the transmission where a community is powered in a microgrid.
Yes.
And becomes autonomous and becomes its own like own oil well or a sun well.
Yeah, and it really leads to remote locations, which brings me to one of the questions I had about the energy policies that we have in the technical world, in the United States, Europe, many of the Asian countries, versus the new developing countries that don't have any infrastructure. And their energy policies and directions are totally ignoring the whole fossil fuel development and going right into solar,
yes,
and wind, and decentralized power.
Yeah, yes and no. It's true to some extent, but also because the Western countries, like for example Canada and the United States, have so much fossil fuel interests, is for the last, I think it's 10 years, is the G8 has been trying to facilitate this transformation. And the problem is Canada and the United States are opposing it because of their fossil fuel interests.
Right. We're heavily invested.
Right, but we
power grid.
Yeah, but what's interesting is we have all this miniaturization happening, whether it's computers or cell phones, and it's all because of the same semiconductor revolution that photovoltaics is a part of. And it's all driven by Einstein's ideas of light and driven by the technology we call semiconducting.
Yes. Well, that was a question I had before because I'm a fan of Buckminster Fuller's, and his statements have always been technology is going to lead us to more from less. And you really see that happening. and we're recycling more and more materials. So we're taking less out of the lands. Amory Lovins also has expressed a very positive future. And he really sees that photovoltaics and other sustainable technologies is really going to bring this planet through the global warming. What we're up against is politics and capitalism. And how do we get around that?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's capitalism because people can make money on photovoltaics, which they are.
They can, yes.
And actually, the stock, the financial advisors are very, very bullish on solar. Goldman Sachs, all these groups are providing immense amounts of capital for solar. I see the whole problem is, first of all, changing people's mindsets, and people are still mired in the thermodynamic ideas. Just like still people talk about the sun rising and setting, they're actually still mired in pre-Copernicus notions. So one is consciousness through education, but also you have these industries which, for example, the utilities, a lot of them are in a state of fear. And so when you're in a state of fear, you do everything to fight. But you have a lot of utilities like, for example, the Southern California Edison in California, that in my own work have facilitated our building of a net zero energy rec center, for example. So it's a very complex situation. And then, of course, there's the question of big solar versus small solar.
Yes, an economy of scale.
And one of the things that I see is that people don't truly understand the capability of the modularity of both, not only photovoltaics, because I don't want to just focus on photovoltaics, but the modularity of solar architecture, because each building becomes its own heat source too.
Yes, it becomes its own utility company.
Yeah. So what I find really interesting is people say, well, the low heat value of solar makes it impossible to use, but in fact they're thinking on thermodynamic terms of a power station when you don't want the temperatures to be that high, otherwise people would boil in their houses or their houses would burn. You wouldn't want to concentrate solar into someone's house.
Right.
But also you can take the panels and you don't want them too hot either because they lose their voltage or they lose their efficiency.
Right.
So actually solar energy techniques are very well adapted to the temperatures of the sun coming in.
Yes. John, I really, really enjoyed reading your book.
Thank you.
The best part of the book for me was talking about the history of New Mexico in the 70s.
Okay.
And what went on here, we called it a solar renaissance,
Right.
which was really wonderful. In your book, we were termed lunatics, not historians, not geniuses, not architects, but lunatics. Where did that come from and why?
Well, that was derived by the lunatics themselves, the self-described lunatics.
Okay.
Because what happened was there was a schism. It's sort of like in the Church of Solar, where there was this, I would call it the academic group, who thought of only engineered very complex systems to heat a house.
They could mathematically analyze.
They could that they're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the group who saw themselves as the rebels or the lunatics, who said, no, there's a very simple way of doing it. Make the house a collector without any moving parts. Let the windows, let the solar mass all play a part in the construction of the house and then in the collection and spreading of the solar heat or the avoidance of solar heat throughout the year to comprise the primary way of getting your house comfortable throughout the year.
And as one who has been doing that and living with it for 40 years here in New Mexico, it works extremely well.
And
extremely well.
And the problem is that solar architecture was thought of as the next big wave, and then we got a very antagonistic administration called the Reagan era. Basically, no one really realizes, and this is also in the book, is that the neocons who became ascendant in the Reagan administration were vehemently anti-solar because they were anti-anything that contradicted the institutions they were fond of, like big power, like big oil, like big nuclear. And also Reagan had what do they say, had a score to settle because he saw all the solar people as the people he put down at Berkeley. And
yes.
so he didn't realize that it was a very, very mixed group that, for example, the biggest supporter of, say, solar in the 70s was the military. But because he was so dogmatically focused on destroying what he called the hippie anti-Vietnam people, solar became his focus. It became the focus of the neocons, and they destroyed everything solar except for the fact that the military, which is ironic, required photovoltaics, and they became the biggest supporters.
Yes, the military is definitely driving photovoltaics. I saw Stephen Chu, Secretary of Energy, speak at ACES one year, and they mentioned it's just national security.
Well, not only national security, not only national security, but in the beginning, and this is what I'm talking about as becoming accustomed, is once ARPA, Advanced Research Projects, which is the technological driver of the military, saw that photovoltaics could run satellites at the long term, because prior batteries were the only technology used, and they lost the batteries in 2 or 3 weeks, no AAA to recharge them.
Yeah.
And suddenly with photovoltaics, you could operate satellites for decades. And they saw this as the new battlefield of the American military. And so they fell in love with photovoltaics, actually.
I'm going to bring you back down to earth.
Okay, down to earth.
And Adobe,
right,
which is a very strong tradition here. It's older than 6,000 years.
Right.
And we combine that with our very simple passive technologies, and it takes care of us very, very well. And there are many applications of passive design. And where do you see that going in the future?
Well,
and various other applications that you see coming out of it.
Well, I see building correctly, and by building correctly, I mean insulation, mass, using the windows to collect solar heat, also using, for example, drapery to control solar heat. All those simple overhangs, all those as very significant because buildings consume 40% of the energy that we now use. But I also see photovoltaics as being passive because there are no moving parts. Nothing ever wears out. It's just like passive. Working together, one is producing the electricity in the house, the other is producing the heat of the house. So they're basically symbiotic.
Oh yeah, very much so.
And also, as you've raised earlier today, the possibility of using photovoltaic material to be part of the building, so it becomes part of the passive design. Not only building skin, but also like the overhangs to keep the sun out during summer and let it allow in during winter, and also on the rooftop keeping the sun off the roof. And what really happens is because we collect the photons, they're used on the array and they don't do anything to the roof because they're dead. We're killing photons as they combine with electrons. So
you're capturing them and using them and redirecting them.
So therefore, the roof does not get any heat, and so that's another passive strategy.
Right.
So we're designing with both the most ancient uses of solar energy, combining with the most modern in a holistic manner. And that's why the history is so interesting, is because all of this is relevant, and we just have to use the ideas of the book and assimilate the old ideas with new techniques, new technologies, and also new analyses. And we've got a 16 billion year time frame of tapping a fusion reactor like people are dreaming of in decades to come to build a fusion reactor. And there's no reason to build a fusion reactor because we can make the house a total fusion collector.
Right. You also mentioned and talked about the Native American cultures, the cliff dwellings, and how they, as a small community, can keep themselves warm in the winter and cool in the summer. We also started talking last night about Acapulco Pueblo and how the whole pueblo is laid out to where in the winter solstice one building does not shade another. The row houses are very linear, east and west, so every home in the pueblo has equal rights to the sun. And that is something that was done by the Pueblo people over 1,000 years ago without a written language. When are we as a society going to get there again?
Well, actually, let's not, be hierarchical about cultures, because the Chinese did the same thing, the Greeks did the same thing, where they allowed everyone to have equal access to the winter sun. And this is what's called convergent evolution. There was a problem. People destroyed the forests. The Chinese did, the Greeks did, the Pueblo dwellers. And so to acclimate or adapt themselves to the new reality, they tapped into the sun. And so, like I say, this is what we call convergent evolution, where in nature, insects, mammals, birds, all develop wings in a similar solution, but from different genetics. Is that clear? And so we're doing the same. We have seen the same thing happen with solar energy. Okay, and so that adaptation will continue and actually flourish even more strongly now that we have photovoltaics too. So we have the generation of heat as in former times, and also now the generation of electricity for everyone.
And we're even taking it further. We're looking at food production within a home, water purification within a home.
Yeah.
And making the home its own spaceship Earth.
Exactly.
Which is just kind of wonderful.
Right.
And Ed Mazzaria writes down in his book and says we need to be there by the year 2030. Well, many of us are there now. And we're producing zero energy homes, and homes that actually generate more energy than they use.
Right.
And it's a very exciting technology. There's many of us working there all over the world, and through the New Mexico Solar Energy Association, the American Solar Energy Association, PLIA, which we talked about yesterday, we're sharing all this fantastic information. As we talked about next week, there's going to be an Earth Conference up in Santa Fe, where we're going to have people all over the world that are building with Earth. And that's one of the greenest materials we have. And when we combine that with solar, it's rather magical. And there are applications all over the world that we can look at that through history, the people have evolved their architecture to work with their climate.
Well, actually, there's three magical pieces, I think. One is light being trapped by clear coverings, because it's almost magical. Like the sun comes in, and then the photons, the energy of the photons, what they do is they make molecules move, what we call heat, and then the glass or the other transparent type of materials traps this, the long wave radiation and keeps it in. The other is using curved materials to create fire from low temperature solar energy, which began 3,000 years ago. And the third, of course, is photovoltaics, which take light that's coming in and voila, electricity.
Yes, yes.
So we have three transformative technologies which can change the world.
Yeah, and concentrating solar is pretty amazing. You know, I've seen it used. I had a very politically incorrect solar cigarette lighter a number of years ago, which is a parabolic thing, but you put it out in the sun and lit your cigarette. And, you know, then you go to the French Pyrenees and you see the Trom solar furnace, which is an 11-story building with mirrors that capture the sun from heliostats on a mountain, focus it on a small aperture, and they're getting temperatures of 2,400 degrees. And that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, but the real useful, as I see, the real useful parts of solar energy is low temperature.
Yes.
And both with solar cells and with glass. And magically transforming light into heat and light into electricity.
Well, my family and I kind of did that last weekend. We were up at our place in Abiquiu and we were harvesting honey. And we needed a way to separate the beeswax from the honey. So we pulled out a little solar oven, put it out in the sun, and it was just a perfect temperature for melting the wax and separating the honey. So we were pretty excited about that. Have you seen any new applications or uses of solar energy that you find exciting?
Well, not new, but yeah, like for example, in the 1940s, saving all the airmen in the South Pacific from certain death if they were shut down, transforming salt water.
Maria Telkes.
Yeah, Maria Telkes. Actually, I have pictures of it in the book. You know, that's another magic. Taking salt water, like taking the poem of Samuel Coleridge, water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink, and turning that water into fresh water where all the drops you can drink.
With nothing more than a plastic pillow. So
exactly.
Put it in the water in the ocean,
exactly.
And that's what all the drinking water you need.
And that's what I'm talking about, the magic.
Yeah, that was very, very exciting. And other applications that I like is food production and combining that with heating your home. So not only is your solar collector heating and cooling your home, but providing nourishment and food. And in our area, humidity,
well, actually,
which is wonderful.
Actually, plants are solar collectors too. We can't forget that they are fighting for photons too, and that photons allow plants to feed themselves better than we do.
Yes.
We don't.
And they store it as energy, sugars, and food.
Plants do not have to go to the supermarket because they are like solar panels themselves. In fact, they are the precursors of the hydrogen economy.
I'm glad you said that, because a lot of times at the solar fiestas and solar meetings, I like to bring 20 to 100 little seedlings and plants that were generated as the byproduct of my solar greenhouse.
Well, also,
and I explain how plants are solar collectors,
exactly,
and how wonderful they are.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you saying that.
Well, it's true.
It is true. And I think we're pretty much at the end of our interview. It's been wonderful, John. And thank you very much for coming to New Mexico and sharing with the New Mexico Solar Energy Association and all of us here in New Mexico.
All right.
John, thank you for a wonderful afternoon. Again, this was John Perlin, the author of the book Let It Shine, a 6,000-year history of solar energy. John, on behalf of the New Mexico Solar Energy Association, I want to thank you for coming, joining, and participating in our annual event. This is Mark Chalom for the New Mexico Solar Energy Association. Thank you very much for watching.